Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Basketball Conference, the ACC Football Podcast. My name is Joey Weaver. He is Mike McDaniel. Mike, team previews rolling on. We're heading to the Steel City. Who are we talking to tonight?
You know, as we go through these previews, we tend to have a few guests where we know we can just pencil them in, and they'll be there, whenever we really ask. Jim Hammett, PantherLayer.com, is one of them, one of our longest tenured guests outside of Cam and Dan Rubin, of course. Jim, what's going on, man?
What's up, guys? I mean, I think this is the 6th or 7th straight year we've done this, previewing Pitt football.
Yeah.
So, it's becoming an annual thing.
Set your watch.
What is this year? Is this year 8 that we've been doing this podcast at this point?
I think it is. How many years have you been married to Maggie? That's an easy way to do the math there.
Well, that's a tougher question. Let's not talk about that. Anyways,
yeah,
really put him on the spot there.
Yeah. No kidding.
I mean, we basically started this podcast a couple weeks before we got married. So,
yeah. Speaking of people who are about to get fired,
yeah, right.
Jim, appreciate your time as always. You have historically been very gracious with your time, which is why we feel like we can pencil you in every year talking about the Pitt Panthers. Of course, your coverage there at PantherLayer.com has been excellent through the years. So thanks again for coming on. We start these every year, and we ask about coaching tenures. And I was telling you before we came on that at this point, I'm not even sure how to ask the question in an interesting way, because it just feels like Pat Narduzzi, in a very comfortable spot at Pittsburgh, has built a fairly consistent program that is winning 7 to 9 games basically every year like clockwork. Is there any sort of unrest? Is there any sense that he might pick up and leave to go elsewhere? Or is this just going to be Narduzzi at Pittsburgh for the foreseeable future, barring some sort of really bizarre external events?
Yeah, I mean, I at this point, I think he's really settled into this role. I think the school, the administration's on board with him. And he's been around for a while now. All of a sudden, I think he's with the second longest tenured coach in the ACC. He's coached the third most games in Pitt football history. He's second in wins. So, I mean, he kind of just does what he does. I mean, there's you know what you're going to get with them on defense. You know the kind of brand of football they play. The type of players they recruit, and it's been a really good run of success right now for Pitt. I mean, you're talking about back-to-back top 25 finishes. They won the ACC championship in 2021. They lead the ACC in draft picks over the past 3 years. That includes Clemson. So, I mean, Pitt's just kind of settled into kind of just doing what they do.
I mean, they have 2 9+ win seasons in the last decade, and they've come the last 2 seasons. I don't know really anybody outside of Dabo in the ACC who's got the kind of job security right now that Narduzzi has.
Yeah, I mean, he signed a significant contract extension a few years ago. I mean, he's settled in, and he's from Eastern Ohio, so I don't know, there's never really a job to me that really screams that he's going to leave. I mean, he turned down Michigan State before. I mean, I guess who knows, whatever happens to the ACC, or if he feels compelled to leave. But I think he's comfortable in Pittsburgh. I mean, I think this is the type of town that kind of suits his personality, I guess.
Let me ask you this about the coaching staff. This is year 2 of Frank Cignetti as offensive coordinator. I remember we talked about a year ago when he was hired. It was a little bit of a homecoming situation. I think he's from the area, if I'm not mistaken. Now this year he's going to be matched up again with Phil Jurkovec, who he had been with for a year or 2 at Boston College. Do you think there was any sort of foresight in that, or any sort of intentionality there, or did it just so happen, he's a pretty good offensive coordinator to bring in, and then, it just so happens that Jurkovec wants to go in the transfer portal, and maybe he was the one kind of trying to get back and play for Cignetti again?
I mean, I think this whole marriage is it just makes a lot of sense, because beyond Jurkovec being, playing for Cignetti, he's from Pittsburgh. He was a 4-star recruit, superstar high school recruit out of Pittsburgh. So it's just whenever he was in the transfer portal, I think it took a day for him to decide he was going to Pitt. So, I mean, I think, there was times during Phil's career at Boston College where he was a legitimate NFL prospect. And there were some injuries. I think he played behind some bad offensive lines. When Cignetti left, things weren't quite as good. So, I mean, overall, I think what Pitt's trying to have happen here is recreate that magic that Jurkovec and Cignetti had in 2020. I think that was his first year, and it was pretty good. I mean, it was the COVID-shortened year, but, Jurkovec was pretty effective. I think they almost upset Clemson that year. So, I mean, there was actual, tangible success there. I mean, I don't know if Pitt has a Zay Flowers he's going to be thrown to, but I mean, I think what they're going for and what they kind of lacked last year is a quarterback that knows how to run this offense. And I think they're feeling like they can hit the ground running this year.
So they have the quarterback to run the offense, but now Izzy Abanikanda's gone, right? So that's a gigantic loss, just considering how he played last year. Pitt really, out of necessity, with Slovis' struggles at quarterback, kind of went more run first. They ran the ball a lot more than I think we've seen in quite some time. How's the offense going to look now? Because, again, you just mentioned they kind of lack the quarterback to run the offense, right? Now you have Cignetti and Jurkovec, and obviously Jurkovec knows this offense from Boston College, and you have that giant loss in the backfield. I guess, how do you replace Abanikanda? That's not a really easy thing to do, but how do you replace him? And on top of it, how does this offense look this year, I guess, compared to what we saw last year?
I think a good starting point for this offense is that they have 3 starting linemen back. They're all seniors, and they've played a lot of games. Jake Cradle and Matt Gonsalves have been around for a while. I think Jake Cradle has 35 career starts. So I think you kind of start up front with this offense, and they're still going to run the ball. I think in an ideal world, Pat Narduzzi's gone through about 4 or 5 coordinators in 8 years. I mean, but it's still the idea is the same. The idea is to be balanced. So I think that's what they're going to go for. I mean, they have a pretty talented running back returning, Rodney Hammond. He's played a lot the past couple seasons. He started 2 games last year. He was pretty effective. So he doesn't have the same home run threat as Abanikanda. He's a little bit smaller, but he'll get the yards in front of him. He's a tough guy. So I think they feel that they can run the ball with that line and that running back. Where I think the offense is going to run into some issues, or at least some question marks right now, it's with just the passing game overall. Because, yeah, I mean, it makes sense Jurkovec's coming back for a coordinator he knows, but he hasn't really played that well the past 2 years, and he's been injured a lot. So, yeah, that's a concern. Pitt's top receiver from last year, Jared Wayne, is moving on. They're returning 2 guys, and Kanate Mumfield and Bub Means. I mean, we always hear how great they are during fall camp and spring camp, but they didn't really show it last year. So, yeah, you have both starting receivers back, but they weren't that effective. And so, yeah, I mean, the whole thing is really, it just ties back to Jurkovec. I think they're going to be able to run the ball. I think they have a good offensive line. But, I mean, looking at Pitt's passing game last year, they only, I think, threw for 11 touchdowns, something like that. I mean, so it's not crazy for Jurkovec to improve upon, but he still needs to do it.
To the point of him staying healthy, I was going to ask, his first couple years at Boston College, one of the things that I thought was, sneaky part of what made him special was the fact that Jurkovec was mobile and was part of the run game. Oftentimes, scrambling, that kind of thing, but sometimes part of the design run game as well. But like you said, a guy who also has a little bit of an injury history, that kind of thing. Have you gotten a sense, either listening to the coaches, anything you may have seen in a spring game or in practice, is the plan for Jurkovec to still have something of a role in the running game by design, or is it we just got to keep this guy healthy and not put him in harm's way as much as we can?
I mean, I would say Phil's more of an improviser. I mean, I was kind of struck by when I saw him in the locker room and just on the field. He's built like a Ben Roethlisberger type of dude. He's 6'5", 230. He's a big kid. So I don't know if he's really going to be a design runner, but he could keep plays alive. He can, fight for extra yards, kind of in the same way Kenny Pickett did. I mean, you wouldn't call Kenny Pickett a runner, but he could at least make plays with his feet. So I kind of think that's where Phil is going into the season.
Defensively, you lose some talent, right? Elijah Cansey gone. That's a significant loss, but you can kind of set your watch to it with Narduzzi. I just feel like the defenses, especially the last 4 or 5 years, have really come into their own. I know when he first got to Pittsburgh, the first few years we were just kind of waiting on that Michigan State defense to show up, and since it's shown up, it really hasn't left, and it just feels like every time they lose talent to the NFL or they lose talent to graduation, just the next guy steps up, and it just feels like they're deep at a lot of different positions, and they're just very, very good every year. And I don't think this year will be too much different.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're going to take a few steps back because I think they had 6 guys drafted last year, and 4 of them were on the defensive side. So it wasn't just Cansey. I mean, Servassier Dennis was a really good linebacker. Brandon Hill, Eric Hallett were really good safeties. But they still have guys back. They have 2 linebackers back. They're really excited about Bengali Kamara. I think the coaches are really high on him. They think he could be an all-ACC linebacker, which says a lot because there's really good linebackers in the ACC this year. Both starting cornerbacks are back. Marquez Williams has been here forever. MJ Devonshire's, he made his name known in the backyard brawl last year with that interception, but he's a good player. And the thing with, like, you lose a Kalijah Cansey, you lose guys like Haba Baldonado, Pitt's the top pass rushing team in the country over the past 4 seasons. I think they have 198 sacks or something like that, and the next closest team's like 170. So, I mean, like, Pitt just, they go after, they attack the quarterback, and they have defensive linemen. I mean, they have experience there. They have some young guys they're pretty excited about. So I think it might not be so great right off the bat. I mean, I think there might be some growing pains, but I would think come October, November, the defense will be pretty good. It's just, they have some tough games early on, so they'll be put to the test early.
If I were to ask you which unit on this team you would consider to be the strength, the one big reason that they're winning games this fall, historically, it's kind of been that defensive line, maybe the defensive front 7. But as you mentioned, a lot of pieces being replaced in flux, we'll say. So is it still that defensive front 7, or do you look at elsewhere this fall?
I mean, I like with both starting cornerbacks back, I think that really helps them a lot. I think they're really excited about their linebackers. I mentioned Bengali Kamara, but Shane Simon started every game last year. He's going to be moving to middle linebacker this year, and they're excited about Solomon DeShield. So I think their linebackers are going to be pretty good. I'm interested with the defensive line because it's going to be a lot of new faces. I mean, they have a lot of senior defensive tackles that have played a lot, but they're kind of the guys that eat up the blocks while Cansey made the plays. So now they're going to be more put in a position to, they're going to have the guys get, tackles for loss and sacks. They've never really proven that, but they've never really had that chance because it was Cansey doing all that work. So, yeah, I mean, I think defensively, linebacker's probably going to be the strength of the team. And if I had to say something for offense, I would probably say the offensive line right now.
You talked earlier about the lack of, I guess, proven pass catchers and the health of Jurkovec. Is wide receiver the spot where, Pitt should be most concerned about depth issues, or is it more just like a proven player thing there? And if it's not the wide receiver group, like what position group on the roster is, Pitt in a position where, all right, if the starters go down, like we're in some trouble here?
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head with wide receiver. I mean, they have 10 scholarship wide receivers for this upcoming season. 4 of them are true freshmen. So if some of these upperclassmen, if Above Means or Konate Mumfield go down, they're probably going to have to play multiple true freshmen anyway. And they've been doing some good things at camp, but again, it's camp. I mean, you need to see how they perform on the field. So I would say wide receiver, and it all ties back to Jurkovec and the passing game. I mean, Pitt needs to have a better passing attack this year, and you have a quarterback that is coming off 2 injury-filled seasons and a wide receiver group that is pretty much unproven outside of 2 guys. So there's optimism. I think there's some talent, but there's a lot of question marks. So yeah, I think wide receiver, they're really thin. If Means or Mumfield go down, I mean, it could get really interesting.
And to that note, I mean, would you say in general are the wide receivers the kind of what you would expect to be the weakness of this team? If there's an Achilles heel, is it that?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I think they've done pretty much their defense is going to be good, even if it's unproven. I mean, I think it might take a little bit, like I mentioned earlier, but I would say right now, wide receiver, you could even extend it to tight end. They didn't really get a lot of production from the tight end position last year, which is interesting because Cignetti's offense is usually tight end friendly. And I have some theories to that. I mean, I don't think Keaton Slovis came from an offense that really utilized tight ends, so I don't know if he was always looking for them. So I think the other hope with Jurkovec is that he can unlock that a little bit, because he's just used to this offense. There are some pass catchers at tight end, but yeah, I mean, I'd say that right now the weaknesses on the team are wide receiver and probably tight end, and if you had to rank all the position groups, they'd probably be at the bottom right now.
Let's take a quick second to remind you about Section103.com. It is the internet's premier place for all things wonderful, wonderful Georgia Tech apparel. They have t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies. They got a couple of three-quarter shirts. They got buttons, stickers, all sorts of things. Things for men, women, children, something for the whole family. Every Georgia Tech fan in your life can use something from Section103.com. Use promo code GOACC for 10% off your first order. They've got some new things all the time coming. Recently came out with some new player shirts. Jerseys, I guess as the kids would call them. Things with a logo on the front, a number on the front, and a number on the back, along with a name. They got shirts for both Zach Pyron as well as Dante Smith, who kind of project to be Georgia Tech's starting quarterback and running back this year. So if you want to support those players, I believe they get some NIL money out of it too. So just keep that in mind for what it's worth. They've got the Juniors Grill shirt. They've got all sorts of great products there. They've also recently come out with a clearance section. So if you're looking for some t-shirts or a couple of hoodies for a slightly lower price point, go check out the clearance section. Once again, it is section103.com or at section_103 on Instagram. Give them a follow. Check it out. All things wonderful Georgia Tech apparel. Again, using the official team colors, the official word marks, everything. It is all officially licensed. It is super comfortable, super high quality. I love mine. You will love yours as well. Check out the performance wear if you're looking for things to keep you cool here during the summer. In any case, one more time, that is section103.com, the internet's best place for all things wonderful Georgia Tech apparel. That's it for now. Let's get back to the show.
We'll get into the schedule here in a second, Jim, but I feel like from the outside looking in, everybody just expects Pitt to win 7 or 8 games. But you mentioned kind of all the question marks across the roster. When's the last time Pitt went into a season with this many questions? Because it does feel like, they are replacing some key positions on defense, and they have, I don't want to say questions at quarterback. Like Jurkovec proves when he's healthy he can play. But, questions with his health. There's questions at receiver. You're replacing an All-American at running back. Like, I can't remember last time Pitt's gone into a season with this many question marks.
Yeah, I mean, maybe like 2017, 2018, because the thing with Pitt, they've probably benefited from that free extra year of COVID, maybe more so than any other team, because I mean, Kenny Pickett, he's like the poster child, but you look at this offensive line the past couple seasons, some of these defensive tackles, I mentioned Marquez Williams, their top corner, they've really gotten a lot of run out of this extra year. So there's been a lot of continuity here. So yeah, there's a lot of experience back, but there's still a lot of question marks.
Another question I'm just going to throw in here, Jim, and it's kind of a little bit of a non sequitur from what we've been talking about here, but I would say that, one of the things about Pat Narduzzi that he has gotten attention for in the last couple of years is that it seems like of all the coaches across at least the Power Five, if not, college football, he is the guy that is most willing to go out there and put it on Front Street when he's not happy about how things are going, when he thinks that other people or other programs, other coaches are behaving in, call them ways unbecoming or,
tampering, baby.
Unhealthy, et cetera, et cetera. Has there been any, what's the reaction been like from maybe within the Pittsburgh program or from Pitt fans to all that? I would imagine that that's probably kind of an endearing thing for a lot of the fan base. It's like our guy is sticking up for us.
Yeah, I think a little bit of that. And I think since he's been around and since he actually won a conference title, I think he actually has somewhat of a voice within college football just because he's been at the same program for a while. And he speaks his mind and he does it regularly. So it's interesting because sometimes he really does put his foot in his mouth and you're like, dude, what are you even saying? Why are you even saying it? But there is some value in it because, he has people talking about Pitt or him or something like that. So during media day this year, my boss, Chris Peak, and I, we kind of asked, they present, all the players to us and we just go to round tables and talk to a couple of them. And so we did poll questions and we actually had a poll question. We were like, what do you think whenever Pat Narduzzi's in the national headlines or he's trending on Twitter? And pretty much the common answer from the team was that's just Deuce being Deuce. Like, he speaks what's on his mind. We back him up. I mean, some of them even said, like, he's probably not always right, but, you know, that's just him. Like, that's his personality. There's a real, like, authentic quality about him because, like, that's not really an act.
Taking a look at the schedule, Jim. Yeah, it is. I was going to say, it really is, because you don't get a lot of coaches who are actually willing to say what's on their mind, or they'll say something that's, you think's on their mind, but really is just coach speak.
I adore the authenticity. I love it.
Yeah, we need more of that. So looking at the schedule, Jim, I mean, look, there are a lot of questions in the ACC outside of like the perceived top two, right, with Clemson and Florida State. I feel like you can go through a handful of schools and say that could definitely be the third best team in the ACC. I think Pitt is certainly on the short list there of, a program that could be the third best team in the ACC on paper, just because even though they are, Pitt is replacing a lot, and there are some question marks at key positions. There is also a lot of talent returning, and Pat Narduzzi has just proven that he can win 7 or 8 games a year basically with whatever roster he has. And that's not even with it, taking the schedule into account. You look at the schedule, open with Wofford, you get Cincinnati at home. Cincinnati's got a new coach and a whole new situation there. West Virginia, I mean, rivalry game, backyard brawl, but Neil Brown's on the hot seat. UNC at home, that's when you want to, that'll be a tougher game, but you get them at home. At Virginia Tech is year 2 of a rebuild. That's a pretty decent opening stretch of 5 games, and I think Narduzzi would sign up for that with a retooled roster.
Yeah, I mean, the non-conference schedule is interesting because you have 2 Big 12 teams in Notre Dame, but I think Cincinnati and West Virginia were picked at the very bottom of the Big 12, so you're not getting very good teams. I mean, they're still Power 5 teams. And, like, even if West Virginia's down, like, that game's in Morgantown. I think it's already scheduled ABC 7:30 type game. So it's going to be wild down there. So it just like last year, that game's just going to be a brawl. I mean, the name it's not a joke. But that opening, that September stretch, it is favorable. They could pick up some momentum. And, I mean, what the season's going to come down to is that kind of that late October, early November stretch when they have to go to Wake, Notre Dame, then host Florida State. I mean, that's going to say a lot about this team. But I think they're in a position where they could kind of open up, maybe 4-1, 5-1, something like that. I mean, if things kind of go their way.
Well, and the game that I look at especially, Jim, is that North Carolina game, right? Rankings just came out. I see that number next to their name. I feel like, though, of all the programs in the ACC who are like least likely to care about North Carolina being ranked, it's probably Pittsburgh. Like, I feel like they give North Carolina absolute hell almost every time they play them. Getting them at home like that in that situation, even coming off the backyard brawl, but still, I do think it is fortuitous, probably, the way that schedule lays out. Like you said, I think 4-1 is a reasonable expectation out of September, if not 5-0 is very much in play, even for a team that has some of the questions that we've laid out here.
Yeah, and I think with that North Carolina game is because, like, Pitt's season, yeah, they finished the year ranked and they won 9 games. It kind of didn't go exactly how they thought it was going to go. I mean, there was, like, they lost to Georgia Tech, they lost to Louisville. So whenever they played North Carolina last year, it was like they were kind of just fighting for their life. The interesting thing about that game is they had, I think, a 10-point lead in the second half, but Kalijah Cansey got hit with a targeting penalty. And once he went out, like, Drake May just went off because, like, he didn't have to worry about Cansey anymore. I mean, that completely changed the game, and North Carolina went on this big run. But, yeah, I mean, I think it can be a good game. I think, every time these teams play, it's usually close. It's usually, I think, the past 2 games in Pittsburgh, it has gone to overtime. So it could be something like that. It wouldn't shock me. I mean, the way Drake May really carved them up last year, it's definitely a concern for Pitt because it really started to happen once Cansey was out of the game. So they're going to need to develop somebody that they can rely on to get to the quarterback by week 4. I mean, that's going to be the key for that game.
I mean, you mentioned that late October, early November stretch, But I mean, is North Carolina the most problematic team you think on paper, just from a matchup standpoint for Pittsburgh, just because of what you mentioned? Maybe questions about the pass rush and being able to get after Drake May, who's just a stud. He's really good.
Yeah, I mean, Drake May's probably the best player they're going to see all year, and he gave them trouble last year. And just the way Notre Dame plays offense, like they're not going to spread them out the way North Carolina does. I mean, I think Florida State with a kind of a mobile quarterback, I don't think Pitt will be in too much trouble with that. It's the quarterbacks. Pitt's defense is vulnerable going deep. That's always been like, yeah, they get after the quarterback, they get a lot of sacks, but they play their quarterbacks on islands. So if you have a quarterback with a pulse, yeah, like 1 week Pitt could give up 10 points and have 8 sacks. The next week they could give up 500 yards and 40 points. It's kind of a feast or famine defense at times, and he's the type of quarterback that can make them pay.
Seeing Notre Dame on this schedule is one thing, but I mean, certainly from an 8 ACC games standpoint, again, North Carolina at Virginia Tech, Louisville at Wake Forest, Florida State, Syracuse at Yankee Stadium for reasons, Boston College, and then at Duke. I feel like the way this sets up, I probably wouldn't say they'll be favored against Florida State there in early November with the way things are looking right now. Maybe not favored against North Carolina, as we said, but I mean, every other one of these games, I would think, even with some questions, again, I think this sets up well for Pittsburgh to go, 5-3, 6-2 in the out of conference, or in conference, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely buy 6-2, 5-3. I mean, I think they're in that realm, and I mean, I think any ACC team, if you can avoid Clemson on the schedule, it's a bonus. So I mean, yeah, you have some tough games with Florida State and North Carolina, but at least you get them both at home, and you don't have to play Clemson. So yeah, I mean, I think in a world that does set up well for them.
This feels like an 8 or 9 win Pitt team again. I'm looking at this, and I just think it sets up that way. The schedule, I think, is really favorable. I think Pitt's maybe worst case scenario in that opening 5-game stretch is, at worst, it's 3-2. And I just feel like they can beat West Virginia in the backyard brawl if they get past that game. Where's the loss? I mean, I guess Carolina's a tough matchup, but out of that 5-game stretch, really, I look at Carolina, just West Virginia in terms of being a rivalry game, but Pitt's the better team on paper, I think. I mean, West Virginia is going to be the worst team in the Big 12 probably, and then that kind of next stretch after the bye week, Louisville, first-year head coach, you get him at home. Wake Forest has plenty of questions. Notre Dame and South Bend, I think from a defense versus offense standpoint, I think Pitt can definitely hang with Notre Dame unless Notre Dame turns into something explosive offensively that they really haven't been in years. Florida State's a tough game, but that closing 3-game stretch, very favorable. Syracuse, winnable. BC, winnable. At Duke, tough game to close the year, but who knows what Duke's going to be in year 2, and I think Pitt, with all the questions they have coming into the year in terms of new talent at different positions, I mean, you hope by the end of the year, if Pitt's still playing well, that's a game where you're pretty happy you're getting Duke at the end and not at the beginning, right? So this feels like 8-4 to me. I'm gonna go with 8-4 just to be conservative. I could see 9-3. This is Narduzzi being Narduzzi. Joey and I have gone back and forth on Narduzzi before, before the Kenny Pickett Heisman campaign year, right? Where it was like
the supernova.
Is this ever going to be better than 7-5? And then all of a sudden it's just we'll win 10, we'll win 9, and now you're rebuilding, and I look at the schedule, I think there's more questions about the other teams on it than there is about Pittsburgh, even with the questions we talked about tonight. So I think Pitt's a really good candidate to be the third best team in the ACC. I really do.
Yeah, I mean, that's going into this whole season. I mean, I think, everyone's going to say Clemson and Florida State, but then there's Pitt, North Carolina, NC State, Miami, Duke, kind of all in that, kind of shake them up and see who comes out first. I mean, again, I think it sets up well for Pitt that their 2 toughest conference games are at home. Their non-conference schedule, yeah, they play a couple Power 5 teams, but they're, not great Power 5 teams. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of things can go right on schedule or, on the schedule and on paper. I mean, just the common theme of the day. I mean, it's what's Phil Jurkovec going to be?
Jim, you mentioned the out-of-conference schedule, and I do feel like it's time for the annual update question here, because you mentioned something a few years ago on a preview that I could not believe was true, but it is that it has been an astoundingly long amount of time since Pitt went 4-0 in their out-of-conference games, or went undefeated, other than the 2020 year where they played Austin Peay, and that was the only out-of-conference game. That didn't really count. But I see here, again, we mentioned they play Cincinnati, they go to West Virginia, which, are kind of Big 12 games, but, I mean, those aren't – I don't expect either one of them to be high-functioning Big 12 teams this year. But then, Jim, in late October, they make the road trip to South Bend, and they go to Notre Dame. So remind me how long it has been since Pitt has gone 4-0 in the out-of-conference, and what chances you give them of breaking that streak at this point.
Well, it's never happened. Because they were an independent.
Never.
So
Okay.
Yeah, they joined the Big East in 91,
Dear
I think. So it's never happened. And I don't know if it's going to happen this year. I mean, that Notre Dame one, there's usually they'll get out to that 3-0 start. Then you're just even the year they were really good, they lost to Western Michigan. They went to Knoxville and beat Tennessee, but then they lost to Western Michigan at home. So
yeah, I forgot about
it's
that.
always it's always something weird like that. Last year they went 3-1, and their one loss, they lost to Tennessee in overtime. But yeah, there's always something holding them back from doing it. I don't know what it is, but I mean, I do think there are times that they have overscheduled and probably played too tough of a non-conference schedule. But I don't think this is actually one of those years.
That 10-win team, I totally forgot about that. Tennessee, they put in Hooker, but it was too late, and then Joey and I were like, "Oh my God, they're going to kill Western Michigan," and then they just
They're going to
did
do it. And they did.
And they just didn't. It's mind-boggling.
Yep.
Yeah, Joey, I totally forgot that it was never that's happened. I knew it was a really long time.
I had forgotten as well. Jim, I had one other question about one of these games. There is one spot, it's interesting. I bring up Notre Dame. Part of what's interesting about that game is that is Phil Jurkovec going back to South Bend, where he was at the beginning of his college career. He then transferred to Boston College. Now he reunites with his former Boston College offensive coordinator at Pittsburgh. The Panthers going to host Boston College on a Thursday night in late in November. Has there been anything, any sort of anything made of that game of Boston College coming to face their old offensive coordinator and their old quarterback here in their new home?
I mean, I think maybe once it gets closer, that'll be a storyline during the week. But I mean, nobody's really brought it up just yet. I mean, there's a lot of bigger games on the horizon, and I think everyone around Pitt, if anyone's looking forward to a game right now, it's West Virginia. So I don't think anyone's gotten to Boston College, but I'm sure that week and even the Notre Dame week, it'll be a storyline for Phil.
Pretty good chance Boston College is going to be terrible anyway, so I wouldn't blame him for not talking about Boston College. Joey, record, what are you thinking?
I mean, before I even looked at the schedule, I was going to say 8-4. So
yeah, I know. Yeah, it's kind of where I was at too.
Everything tracks, right? It's a solid, well-coached, consistent program, and that's more than you can say about a lot of ACC programs at this point. So, I think 8-4. Do I expect them to maybe stub their toe on a couple of these teams? Yeah, probably. Seems like they do, but consistently, week in, week out, do I think that they'll be in position to win games? Yeah, I do. And I mean, 8-4, I think is kind of where I'm leaning, unless, kind of like Jim mentioned, I mean, if there's some cluster injuries maybe in the receiver group or something like that, it could really start to derail things. But I mean, in general, again, the offense has been consistent. The defense has been one of the best in the league pretty consistently. How do you say no to that? So I'm just going to say 8-4, and if I look silly, then I look silly.
Jim, real quick, how does Pitt feel behind Jurkovec?
I mean, I think do you mean the team or fan base?
No, I just mean behind him at quarterback. If he gets hurt, how are they feeling about depth there? Because we didn't really get into that, and I'm interested now.
So they brought in 2 transfer quarterbacks last offseason. The other one is Christian Veillere. He's from Penn State. He actually started a game for Penn State, and I think they were pretty high on him, but then, they kind of settled on, DrewLar being their next quarterback. So Christian's probably going to be the quarterback next season, and I think they're comfortable if he had to play this year. And even in the 2022 season, Slovis got hurt, and their backup, Nick Patty, got hurt. So they had to start like a third string, and he's back. So, they have a few guys they can go to. But Christian Veillere's probably the quarterback of the future, so I think they're pretty comfortable there.
I forgot we had the bowl game explosion with Nick Patty. Wasn't he, really good in the bowl game? He went nuts a lot. Yeah. Unbelievable.
Jim, do you have a record prediction officially?
I think I'm sitting on 8-4 as well. I say 3-1 in the non-conference. I don't know if they'll beat Notre Dame, but that'll be an interesting game. Probably about 5-3 in ACC. I could see North Carolina and Florida State giving them some trouble, and maybe they stub their toe against, I don't know, Wake or Syracuse up in Yankee Stadium for some reason.
The last thing I'll call out is that what I'm seeing at my local shop is a win total for Pittsburgh of 6.5, and the over is -191.
Okay.
Which at that point, just make it 7. Why are we -191? Come on, they're telling you exactly what to do there. So that number feels too low to me. I would be surprised. I'd be a little bit surprised at least if this ends up worse than 7-5. I think that would probably mean something went wrong.
Quarterback gets hurt.
Something. Yep.
Yeah. Jim, appreciate it, man. Go ahead and plug where you're at, as usual, where everybody can find your stuff.
Yeah, we're pantherlair.com, panther-lair.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt news on the internet. We're on the Rivals.com network. You can follow me on Twitter at Jim Hammett, and that's with 2 M's and 2 T's.
Go do that. Best Pitt coverage on the internet. Go do that right now. Jim, you're the man. Really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you for joining us, man.
Yeah, and maybe sometime during the season.
Yeah, we need to do that.
Oh, yeah.
What you doing Saturday nights?
I was going to say Saturday Night Fever, baby.
Usually I'm still at the stadium till hours of the night.
Even better. Even better.
Well,
maybe
we'll
live from the press box. Who knows?
Yeah, I was going to say.
In my experience, they usually have free beer there, so,
Yeah, and if you're joining us for one of our, late night recordings, you're going to need a couple of those beers. So, yeah.
Jim, you're the man. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
You too. Mike, let's get out of here. Let's go preview some more teams. In the meantime, they can find us on Twitter. I'm at FTRS Joey. He's at Mike McDaniel SI. We're at BC Podcast ACC together. Go follow him at Jim Hammett, all one word, 2 M's, 2 T's, and once again at panther-lair.com on the Rivals Network for all things wonderful, wonderful Pittsburgh coverage. Mike, we're on iTunes, Spotify, all those good places you go find your podcasts. Hit the subscribe button, rate, review, those things. By the way, on Spotify, if you're listening on there, there's some listener questions on there. So if you want to drop record predictions for some of these teams on Spotify, you can go do that there. Go check that out. Mike, they can send emails to the longest email address known to man, basketballconferencepodcast@gmail.com.
Nailed it.
Thank you. Where else on the social medias?
Facebook.com/basketballconference rate review. Find some of our podcasts there, including this one. Instagram at BC Podcast ACC. YouTube.com/@the ACC Football Podcast. Please subscribe.
Do it for the gram. Do it for the tube. I guess that works. That's fine.
That checks out.
Mike, that's all I got. Anything else?
Nah, man. The previews roll on.
You want to preview another team here soon?
Yeah, we're over halfway.
We are. Like I said, there's a Bon Jovi song about that, but we'll do some research into that. All right. Let's get out of here. We'll come back and preview some more teams. Until next time, for Mr. Mike McDaniel and for Mr. Jim Hammett, I am Joey Weaver. Thank you guys so much for listening. We will talk to you again soon, and until then, hail to Pitt and go ACC.